Right, Adam. So, how's it going, man? First of all, where are you, and what on earth is that behind you on the wall?
Good evening. I'm currently in Samara, in Ghana, where I work.
Yeah.
That is an elephant collar, the GPS receiving elephant collar. It's one of the ones that belongs to the Mara Elephant Project. It's old and obviously not in current use, but it's one of the things that we're looking to raise money to is to recollar a couple of problematic elephants in the Mara. So
Okay.
that's just a talking piece, really.
Brilliant. Well, there you go. Adam, I mean, I first came into contact with you. I know you've been a lot of work with big cats, and that's been a passion of yours. And I know we chat a lot about your time up in India. I know you spent a lot of time in Londolozi and in the Pantanal, and now all of a sudden you've just come back from the Congo. How on earth did that all kind of pan out? And yeah, tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so big cats historically over the last almost 13 years, big cats have been my main driver. But I didn't want to exclude areas that didn't have cats. And in saying that the Congo has cats, we actually did hear a leopard calling. We never saw a leopard, but we heard one calling. So I wouldn't not go to an area because of the big cats. What led me to the Congo was to go to a place that the majority of people think is almost taboo and out of bounds and too dark and too dangerous. And I am a big seeker of proper wilderness, untouristed wilderness, and that's what led me to the Congo.
Not many of those places out there left anymore, are there?
No, the most remote I've ever been was last year. I was in Manu National Park in Peru.
Hmm.
Um, that was as remote as I think you could possibly get at the moment.
Yeah.
So there are not many left, and usually, what I'm a big fan of going to places before they're established, when they're actually a bit more difficult. I'm not a big fan. I'm a photographer. I would never call myself purely a photographer, but I don't like to go to places when the animals are already habituated, when the paths are already well trodden. I like to go to places and actually contribute towards the habituation, towards the making the trails, towards that kind of stuff. And then post that, other people will come in and they'll do their thing and they'll probably get better photos. That's fine. But I like,
That experience side that, I often say that I was born, too late. You go back a couple of hundred years, that raw, authentic African experience. And
yeah,
there's something to
yeah.
be
So
said about that as
it's,
well.
it's exactly that. It's in a day and age where we, or certainly I, seek wilderness and seek um, those as much about experiences as I am about animals.
Yeah.
So for example, it doesn't matter really what you see. It's how you're doing it. That's really what drives me, and the quest to try and get to those few spots that are left in this world.
Mm.
And the Congo is one of them, and certainly one of the most enjoyable, adventurous but comfortable adventurous trips I've ever been on.
Yeah. So I think your time is very similar to the itinerary that we're going to be running in February and that I'm going to be hosting up there. And again, this was, I remember years ago when this particular property, in Odzala-Kokua National Park was first on the market. It was run by Wilderness Safaris. It's since now changed hands and it's with the Congo Conservation Corporation,
Yeah.
I think it is.
Congo Conservation Company, yeah.
Yeah. So it's just an incredible piece of Africa. And the first thing is, people think about Congo, and there's a distinction that needs to be made there between the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Two Congos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
If
walk
I
us through that.
if I were in charge of tourism for the Republic of Congo, I would change the name of the country. Um, because quite literally, you've got the Republic of Congo and you've got the Democratic Republic of Congo, and to all people, they are just Congo.
Yeah.
And it's quite fun to bounce the name around Congo, but really, it's a geographical area. It's the Congo Basin. It's a geographical area. It's two countries, one of which is in trouble, and the other which is doing really quite well. And the one that Odzala is in is the one that's doing really quite well. And the first thing that'll absolutely blow your mind when you go there is the state of the city, the Brazzaville, the capital.
So that's where the whole itinerary starts, and you fly out of Brazzaville right up
Yeah.
north into Odzala. So
So Brazzaville is similar. It reminded me in some ways to Kigali in Rwanda, in that it's an African country that is definitely African, but it's clean. It feels safe. It feels like it's controllable. It feels nice size. And then you look across the Congo River, which for me was always a dream. I never imagined I would ever see the Congo River, but you look across this river that must be 1.5 kilometers wide, maybe even more. And on the other side, you have Kinshasa, which is one of the most overwhelming and daunting cities that I will probably never go to. And there is a different world. You've got 18 million people living in Kinshasa, and you've got something like 1 million living in Brazzaville. And you just wonder why on earth everyone isn't swimming across the river to get to Brazzaville, because it works really quite well. So it's a very soft introduction to a country that in your mind will be quite a difficult space.
Sure. So flying out of Brazzaville, flying up north into Odzala, I mean, I'm going to be sharing little bits and pieces of the video clip that you put together whilst you were up there as well. I mean, just flying in there, I mean, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, so the most amazing thing is flying over the Congo River. I mean, that is one of the world's great rivers to see. We just walked a little bit along the riverbanks before we flew, and just to see what people are doing on that river is extraordinary. The actual flight is spectacular, and you very quickly get out of any human life and you start getting into forests. But what's surprised me, I'm very well experienced in Amazon, so in South American forest, where it's just blankets and blankets of forest. The Congo is more forests, and then these islands of savanna. So as you're flying, you've got trees, and then suddenly it's just open grasslands, and then trees, and then grasslands. And it's hugely exciting because you're going north, you're going about an hour and a half, I would guess, about an hour and a half flight. And you're wondering how on earth you're going to land in amongst all this. But then all of a sudden you come down, it's an extraordinary place to put an airstrip. They've done very well there. And you land, and then you open the door and you are suddenly in the Congo. And it's a forest, but it hasn't got the difficulty of the Amazon. It's got the beauty, but it's not something. You don't open the door and go, shit, I'm really in trouble here, I'm out of my depth. You go, hang on, I could do this. I can access this rainforest. It's doable, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, those grasslands and open areas, and you mentioned hearing leopard out there, and I know that hyena and that sort of thing have been seen and documented in there as well. It's those kind of ecotones and those little mosaic kind of patches that must just add such an incredible diversity. But then also from a kind of biological side of things, having these little pockets and islands of species just nested all over the place. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, very, very diverse. And the birding changes all the time. So you go from a savanna where you've got certain birds, and then all of a sudden you come into a forest and it changes. Yeah. I wasn't there long enough nearly to come to grips with the vegetation, with the bird life, all that was going on. I took this more as an experience to just try and be overwhelmed, allow myself to be overwhelmed. And then I also was continually comparing it to South America, be it good or bad. Having spent so much time of my life in Brazil and Peru, I was looking more just about not trying to specify what the vegetation was called, but more like, oh, that's the role it's playing in a system that I'm familiar with, but on another continent.
Sure. So then the first couple of nights of your journey, you guys went to Ngaka camp?
Yep.
And so this is the camp where they trek habituated groups of Western lowland gorillas, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, first of all, have you trekked gorillas before, and how does this compare, and what was your experience like?
Okay, so prior to this trip, I'd never seen a great ape. I'd never seen a gorilla. I've always been a little bit swayed off, one, by the price of gorilla permits, and two, by the fact that they seem in Rwanda, Uganda, they seem to be so relaxed that you sit right next to them, and that didn't sit too well with me. So when I heard about the Western lowland gorilla and the fact that it was in the process of being habituated and they still were completely wild, that excited me. So I flew into, we landed, and then you've got a bit of a drive to get to the camp, and from the camp then we overnighted. The next morning you head off and you go looking for these gorillas. It's tough. It's tough, but it's certainly not too tough. It's nicely tough. And the one thing that surprised me was that they asked us to wear masks, which first I was like, doesn't really make sense, but I understand why they're doing it. They're really trying to protect this gorilla species, of which there's not many left at all. And anything that humans might pass on to the gorillas. So you wear the masks when you come into close contact with them. But the first sighting I had of one was a very brief one at first, because it was sitting right by the path. And that moment that you see a gorilla for the first time is extraordinary. And then when you realize that you actually have them all around you and they're in the trees and not on the floor. So I was kind of, all the photographs I've ever seen of gorillas have been on the floor. These gorillas are tree gorillas. They're living up there. And so to see something like when you see a big silverback up in the top of a tree, it's like looking at something the size of an adult male human, high up in a tree, and you see the way he's moving around, and he's strangely human, but so much more, mobile than we are. And yeah, extraordinary. It wasn't what I thought, because I was expecting a ground gorilla, but almost all the time we spent with them, they were up in the trees, doing a lot more than I think the gorillas in Rwanda and Uganda do, because these gorillas are feeding a lot more. They're moving a lot more in the canopy. Yeah. Yeah, we did two. So you do one in the first morning, and then they do it. You walk. They've got 3 families that they're working with. 2 are used with guests, and the third is not. The third is used with researchers as a control. So they're trying to evaluate the impact that the guests are having. They have a very different outlook to the Rwandan Ugandan ones, in that they don't want the gorillas to come and be sitting right next to you. They want the gorillas to be comfortable with you being around, but they want them to continue doing their thing. So you don't get as close. You're not going to get for me, it was more gorilla in landscape, in environment, than those close-up facial shots. I had a 70 to 200, which I would say is probably at least, 2.8, but too short. Too short if you're wanting those close ones. I had to embrace that and go like, well, I brought the wrong lens, so let me just enjoy taking a gorilla in the forest.
Can I ask, not being able to get as close and kind of having to observe, did it add to the experience? Or you almost feel like you're a voyeur, you're just peering into this world, and you're not actually part of it. There's no, whilst they may know that you're there, you're not impacting on that behavior at all. You're just there and you're observing a moment.
Yeah. You go through, I think you go through 2 phases. The first one is that you feel, well, a couple of phases, but the first one is you're a little bit overwhelmed. You've seen a gorilla. The second one is you start to become a little bit frustrated that you're not closer, and you think, oh, I want to be closer. But then the third one is when you realize that it's actually really cool that you're not closer, and you just kind of sit down and just watch. And they definitely do their thing. They're well aware of you. They look at you, but they're of a distance that you don't feel you're intruding. It's a different experience to anything that I've ever done.
Brilliant. Yeah. And how long were you with each group for?
So roughly an hour. Their guidelines are, once you see the gorillas, roughly an hour, but they don't say start and stop. What they do is they kind of say, well, you saw it for 10 minutes, then they disappear, and then you find them again, and they roughly add it up. Okay. It's certainly not, there isn't the pressure. Because it's so remote, because there's so few people going there. It isn't the start, stop, your watch is going now. Yeah. It's more like it probably should be, and more like it probably was in Uganda and Rwanda many years ago.
And one of the other things that's really appealed to me about this gorilla experience is that it's not just gorillas. And so when you're back at the lodge, there's still a lot around there. There's a number of different primate species around, night forest walks, and just it seems like you've got this incredible blanket of opportunities just surrounding the camp, which in itself looks amazing. Did you guys do some night walks and that sort of stuff, picking up on the smaller things like the fungus and the insects and the plants, and it just looks as though it's incredible. So well, one thing which was exciting was we heard chimpanzees almost every day. Okay. We didn't see, but we heard them, which was wonderful. The night stuff is quite special. We went out on. We didn't do a night walk. What we did was a night drive, and we must have got most of the bush baby, the galago species that you could see in the area. We must have got them in about a 2-hour night drive. Sure. And unusual things like pouched rats that I've
didn't even really know what they were. And you've got these huge rats, and you've got bush babies up in the trees, and really quite special stuff that you wouldn't see. We even got the view of a chameleon, which apparently in that system is very, very difficult to see. So the nighttime stuff is special. If you get lucky and see a chimp, that must be an extraordinary experience. I would not put any money on seeing the chimps, but to hear them is wonderful. I think that's a long-term goal for them to try and habituate some chimps, but that'll take a while. Yeah.
Brilliant. And then, so from there, in our itinerary, we've then started to move back down south towards more of the Bai system, which, again, this is one of the key features of this whole area of the Congo, I think, is these Bais. Tell us a little bit about your game viewing experience there. I mean, some of the things are the forest elephant, things like bongo, buffalo, I mean, giant river hog. It's just a whole different world out there, isn't it?
Yeah. So the first cool thing to mention though is, so after the 2 gorilla treks and the couple of nights there, you move back up. So you're the furthest away at that stage that you'll get. Then you move back up more towards the heart of the park, and that drive is stunning. That's going through a massive mixture of vegetation. We had an incredible experience there where we were charged by a silverback in the car, and completely non-habituated gorilla that probably doesn't see many people at all. And the sound was extraordinary. I've been charged by numerous big cats in my time, but never a sound like that. Wow. So we had that amazing experience on the way up to the next camp, and that's where the Bai is, which you're talking about. And it is the most picturesque place ever. It's extraordinary what they've done. It's basically just a raised camp with boardwalks in between each little kind of hut. Beautiful communal area, and you're overlooking this, what essentially I would call a swampy grassland in amongst the forest. I don't know if that's the real definition of Bai, but it's essentially about half a foot to a foot deep in all places, and it's just grass. And there, that's where you get extraordinary views of buffalo, which it's a very different look to the buffalo that we're used to. This is the forest buffalo, much smaller, much more cow-like, much prettier, certainly much prettier. So you'll see buffalo all the time, and the ones around the camp are relatively relaxed. They still are wild by all means, but they're more relaxed than the ones you're going to see later on whilst you're walking. The other thing, which is probably the most special, is the elephants coming in. They mine the clay on the bottom of the Bai. So what they do is they come in and they use their trunk and they blow air, and they're blowing away the silt so they can get to whatever the clay is, or the mineral in the clay at the bottom, and then they're eating that. And they usually do that in the late evening or through the night. And so while you're sleeping in your room, you hear this bubbling, blowing sound, and then you hear the swishing of the elephants as they go through the water. Often you can't see them, but you know that there are big herds around there. What we had was quite fun. We had, one of the guys had a pair of binoculars that had infrared on it, so we could the FLIR, and you could watch from a distance. You could just see a whole family of this red heat signature of these elephants moving through. So that is very special. It's a very much an audio experience if you can't see at night. They're very determined to not scare those elephants off, so they don't put any lights on them at night or anything. So it's, once the sun's gone, that's it. You're basically just listening to what's going on. But they're all around you, and you sit there on the beautiful deck and you're just listening to these elephants blowing water.
Magic.
What else would you say? There's a lot of kind of bush buck, the Sitatunga around there as well. Bongo is one that we tried very hard. We saw tracks of. We didn't get lucky. No bongo in the Congo for us, but they are there. And for me, what was more special than once you've got those main core animals, the big mammals rather, you then start to look at the monkeys, and then you start to look at the birds. And the birds are what really are quite extraordinary. I mean, to see a flock of African grey parrots in the wild, for me, the only thing like it was when I went to South America for the first time and I saw a macaw flying over the Amazon River. Yeah. And I was like, the only macaw I'd ever seen had been in a cage in a pet shop. Yeah. And it's the same. The only African grey parrot that I'd ever seen was in a pet shop in Sandton in Johannesburg. Yeah. And to suddenly see a flock of a couple of hundred of them fly overhead, was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah.
So the bird life starts becoming very special there as well. Yeah.
I believe good numbers of green pigeons and that sort of stuff coming down to those bars as well.
Green pigeons in the thousands.
Yeah.
In the thousands, yeah. I think we have 7 nights or so, we must have got to just over 210 species or so. But that we did have an exceptional, we had 2 exceptional birders that are in a league that is comparable really to most people.
Yeah.
We were trying to discover new birds for the whole of Republic of Congo. So that's the level that we were at. But I would say that happily in your time, if you're just a keen or average to keen birder, you should get about 100, 150 in that region. But the thing is, there'll be a lot of very special birds in amongst that.
And talking about experiences, I mean, once you're down at Lango, walking through these bars, so the activities there, I mean, from canoeing, walking, there's still boats, power boating, and that sort of stuff around there as well. Just you immerse yourself in that region.
So it's the way to embrace this place is more of think of it as an expedition and expedition of experiences, and get your head off the pressure of the gorilla, the elephant, the buffalo, and more into the experiences. And the fact that you can walk in water, I mean, I've always been very cautious of water because water is dangerous. Water's got snakes and crocodiles and all that. This water is completely different. It's about a foot. It's about a foot deep and it's clear, and you can see what's coming. You see the buffalo, you see the elephant a long way away, so you don't get into that tight situation when you're in the water. And yeah, to walk in water knee deep and sometimes waist deep, it's one of those things that you've got to jump over the cliff in order to get there. It takes a lot of courage to get there, but once you're in it, once you're experiencing that, that's when Odzala becomes at its best, is when you embrace that. If you hold back and you go, oh, the water, I'm not so sure about the water, it's a difficult place. But once you go, I'm in it.
Thinking, whoa, hang on, this is now getting a little too adventurous. I'm going to try and insert that clip where I see you guys walking through that beautiful section there. I mean, it's quite stable underfoot and it's not muddy and, boggy. And, so it's a bit like, watching people when it starts to rain. Everyone kind of dashes inside. You don't want to get wet. But once you actually start to embrace it, it's beautiful.
Yeah, once you're wet, it's wonderful. And the substrate is very fine little pebbles and sand. So you can even walk barefoot, which I find extraordinary. Again, coming from the Amazon, where you would, if you took your shoes off and you walked into the Amazon 10 meters, you would be in trouble. Versus this, you could literally take a whole day walk without shoes on. So we started talking about it as being the friendly forest and the very forgiving forest, because the substrate is so decomposed and so gentle and so soft and wet that it actually isn't really bad. I personally wouldn't walk barefoot, because purely in my mind thinking that if there was one branch or one bone fragment or one anything, it just makes it a little bit difficult. It could ruin the rest of the trip. So what I found myself wearing was just a pair of shoes, trainers, and they get wet, and that's fine. And they get wet every single day, and you put them out in the evening, they get dry, and then the next day they're wet. And you're literally walking in water that's a foot deep.
Yeah. So for someone who's watching this thinking, this sounds great, but insects walking through water and that sort of stuff, someone who's on the edge of saying that this sounds like an adventure I could push myself into, but I'm not too sure, what would you say to them to kind of, is this for everybody? Who shouldn't be out there? And how would you comfort someone who's kind of on that edge?
Okay. Firstly, it isn't for everybody. It isn't. If you're looking for comfort, then no. If you're looking for guaranteed big animals falling out the trees, then no. It is comfortable. The camp is very comfortable, completely comfortable. And it's incredible that you can go for a walk in the forest and return and have an ice cold gin and tonic or an ice cold beer and have a very good meal. The food was delicious, absolutely delicious. But when you're out there, it's not like sitting on the back of a game drive car with your guide just driving around and you can just lean back and you actually have to put the time and the effort in. You actually have to walk those miles, and you have to do that. So if you're at all hesitant, then I would say rather don't, because if you're going to do this, you must do it properly. It is an exceptional experience, but when you're there, you are there. You're in the thick of things. You can very easily imagine what it must have been like, many, many years ago. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. It's what it is. So in terms of the insects, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. Again, I went there expecting, Amazon terror, the reign of terror, basically, and it doesn't really happen. The gorillas, you get sweat bees. Sweat bees are they're non-biting, but they're highly annoying, and they will appear and they will get into every kind of little place that they can. And actually, the way that you're getting close to a gorilla is you usually can smell them, because they smell a bit, and you start getting surrounded in sweat bees. But those you can wear a little head kind of netting kind of thing, or you just take it as it is. If you get upset about it, if that kind of angers you, that there are little bees on you, then no, it's not the right place. But if you can put up with that, it's an exceptional thing. And those insects are what's kept people out. And that's the way I always look. That's the way I looked at all rainforests, was that if rainforests were easy to live in, then the rainforest wouldn't exist anymore.
But like the fly in a lot of areas in Africa, and how they've kept areas, completely wild by livestock.
Exactly. And so mosquitoes weren't too bad. Sweat bees were only bad around certain areas, and they're not bees. They're just sweat. They're not biting at all. Down by the water, you wouldn't hang out on the beach kind of areas, because there's sandflies and that. But when you're walking, absolutely no issue. So insects weren't really too bad, but it is an experience. It's wet, it's sandy, it's muddy, but you do have hot showers. You do have an ice cold beer when you come back. It's not like you're camping. It's not like you're having to go and have a bucket shower afterwards. You've got a hot water shower.
And it's certainly, it's not a cheap exercise, but when you think about the logistics of running camps anywhere, never mind, a remote forest like this, but also then the experiences that these guys are delivering, and the standard of accommodation, and also I think importantly the contribution to conservation. I was really excited to hear about the research that was being done on these western lowland gorillas, and how I think it's Sabine Plattner, how her organization and everything is getting involved in really claiming back parts of Odzala and really trying to preserve the heritage of the park.
So two things on that. One, I spent a lot of last year trying to set up tourism in Manu in Peru, in a similar location, as isolated, and it was too difficult. We couldn't do it. So anything that was going to be there was always going to be expensive, because even just to get a basic meal in there would be hard. To get a bed, try getting a bed into that area even. So what they've achieved there is exceptional. It's truly exceptional. The fact that there is a comfortable camp in the middle of the Congo Basin is exceptional. And what Sabine Plattner has done there is, phenomenal. If it doesn't work, then nothing will work. And that for me is the reason I started getting involved in it. I was like, well, if she can't do it and if her team can't do it, then we're going to lose the Congo Basin. Well, that part, we're going to lose Odzala, because this is as good as you could possibly get in that environment, and support what people are doing to conserve an area, because if that fails, the alternative is logging and bushmeat and gone. And that's where we're at. And that places in Africa are. You've either got to go off the beaten track, get slightly uncomfortable, pay a bit of money, but to support them, or we turn our backs and go, you know what, this isn't for us. But then you must know that those places are going to disappear.
Yeah, and I think coming back to where we all started is, and this is before you start to take in the difference in names between the countries, and that these guys are already on the back foot because of the negative connotations and associations. with the Congo and with that area in the Democratic Republic. It's it's interesting. Well, I'm certainly very excited to get up there. Adam, thank you again for your time and your input. And quickly, just tell us. I mean, you guys are doing quite a bit with you're involved in the Greatest Masai Mara competition. I know we've got a couple of guests who've travelled with us who are involved there as well, and a couple of our guides in the running. It's been a great year for you guys, eh?
Yeah. So basically, we in summary, we're trying to show the world what the world should already know, which is the fact that you don't just need to come to the Masai Mara for the migration. You don't need
more than just the migration.
There is more than just migration, and so the way to do that was for us to show imagery from around the world, from around the Mara, all year round. So we incentivize people to send us the images by creating a competition, and that is what we call the Greatest Masai Mara Photographer of the Year. And the guys at Wild Eye have been hugely supportive of it. And you've got a photographer who's won the months of February and June. So at the end of the year, he's got a big chance of winning a very large prize, and really going towards a good cause. Because not only is it trying to change the misconception that the world has of the Mara, but it's also trying to get exposure for a couple of organizations that are doing work in the Mara that no one will ever find out about otherwise. I mean, there's a lady here who spends all her time trying to get the local Masai people to have wire bomas rather than the traditional wooden bomas, to try and stop the lions going in and stealing the cattle and the goats and all that. Her entire life is dedicated towards that, because she knows that if lions break into the boma, the locals will kill the lions, which is understandable. That's their livelihood. So she's dedicated her life to building these bomas. So one of the ways that we help her is that if you want to enter this competition and you want your entry fee, or $20 entry fee to go to her, it will go to her. And we've identified six groups like that. And it's fantastic. So it's raising some money, it's raising awareness, and it's creating great content to show the world what the Mara has.
Brilliant. I think it's been a massive success in the first year, and I'm very excited to see what you guys are going to get up to in the second year and how we can support you there. And thanks again for your time, mate. I really, really appreciate it.
Most welcome.